Let's get you all caught up on this Monday episode. There's a new member of the hitting coaching staff. There's a new placement for the left field wall, and so much more to get to. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, November 18th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to run through the news and notes from the past few days in Birdland. Sherman Johnson has been promoted to be the final member of the Orioles Major League coaching staff on the hitting side. We'll talk about his quick ascension through the O system. Then we'll briefly touch on the Orioles' decision to move the left field wall back in, what it will look like, and get you ready for tomorrow's episode when we really dive into that. And then finally, a lot of other Orioles news and notes, nuggets, Chris Holt, Cole Irvin, Rule 5 protection deadline, all that good stuff is coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So we start today with another new member of the Orioles Major League coaching staff. And as Andy Koska of the Baltimore Banner reported on Friday, Sherman Johnson has been promoted/hired as the third hitting coach, basically second assistant hitting coach on the Major League staff. Sherman Johnson will join Tommy Joseph, who the Orioles hired away from the Mariners. They will both be assistant hitting coaches, and they will serve under Cody Asche, who was promoted from offensive strategist to the lead MLB hitting coach for the Orioles heading into the season after Ryan Fuller departed to become the director of hitting for the White Sox and Matt Borg-Schulte departed to become the hitting coach for the Minnesota Twins, each of them serving in the last 3 years as Orioles co-hitting coaches at the major league level. So this does round out pretty much the hitting staff for the Orioles at the big league level. Again, Cody Asche as your hitting coach, Tommy Joseph and Sherman Johnson as the assistant hitting coaches. Now, who is Sherman Johnson? Well, this will only be his third year as a member of the Orioles organization. He was basically hired right off the field by the Orioles to be a coach. The O's hired him before 2023, and immediately, they didn't put him in the FCL. They didn't put him in Delmarva. They put him right in Bowie as their AA hitting coach as soon as they hired him in 2023. It was a fairly aggressive move for a guy's first coaching job at anywhere near that level. And then he immediately was promoted in 2024. He was the Orioles upper level minor league hitting coordinator, so got a promotion after 1 year. And when you heard people talk about Sherman Johnson in this organization, it was only glowing things, not just about the work you could do with him, but just his ability as a hitting coach at his age as well. I mean, pretty fast ascension to be in the big leagues by 2025, but the guys in this system love him. Now, Sherman's playing background, he was a 14th round pick of the Angels out of Florida State back in 2012, and he did make his major league debut in 2018. He finally made it to the big leagues with the Angels, and he played in 10 games, but never got that first big league hit. Went 0 for 10 with 4 strikeouts and a hit by pitch. He did reach base once, but never got that first big league hit and never did get back to the big leagues. He was released by the Twins. He ended up in AAA with the Reds in 2019, but could not break through that year into the big leagues. 2020, the minor league season was canceled. Then he was in 2021 with the Twins in AAA, still couldn't get to the big leagues. But when he was in AAA with Minnesota in 2021, his hitting coach at AAA that year was Matt Borg-Schulte. That was his final year with the Twins organization before the Orioles would hire him away that winter to become their major league co-hitting coach. And that is where Johnson's big connection to the organization came. And really the next year, the Orioles hired him off the field because he was released by the Twins. He played independent ball for the Kane County Cougars in 2022. And after that season, he was basically like, yeah, I'm done playing. Wanted to get into coaching. And the Orioles hired him immediately to go to AA. And he's done great work with some of the O's prospects. He's only 34 years old. I mean, when you get to the big leagues, he's not going to be that much older than a lot of the top hitters he is working with in this Orioles lineup. And he did spend some time as a guest coach in the Orioles dugout at the major league level throughout the 2024 season. Because when you are one of those hitting coordinators at the minor league level, you're not assigned to one specific team like he was in 2023 with the Bay Sox. So you kind of rove around. He spent some time in Bowie, spent some time in Norfolk, but also spent some time in Baltimore with the Orioles. So already got a little bit of a taste of that like and what that job looks like, which I think certainly helped him get this job here. He really does seem ready. And I love this hire, this promotion of Sherman Johnson. The Orioles kind of did what we thought, right? They had 2 openings. I figured Cody Ashley would get promoted to the main hitting coach, or at least one of the main hitting coaches. That's what happened. I figured there'd be one internal promotion from the minor leagues, that's Sherman Johnson, and one outside hire, that was Tommy Joseph, who they brought over from the Mariners. And that kind of secures those 3 hitting coaches. I don't understand some of the people that are like, why do you, nobody has, no, most teams have a main hitting coach or 2 main hitting coaches and at least 1 or 2 assistant hitting coaches. Like, this is pretty standard for a big league dugout. Look around. And it's a lot of work. Like, you're working with 13 different hitters who have 13 different sets of needs at any given time at the big league level. That is way too much for 1 or even 2 people to handle. And Sherman Johnson, I think the guys love him, and I think he's going to make a really positive impact on this Orioles dugout. And listen, it's a staff with Ashe, Joseph, and Johnson. They're all in like their mid to late 30s. I don't think any of them have even hit 40 yet. And you know, you're definitely older than most of the Orioles hitters, because we know this team still skews young at this point. But you're kind of that maybe perfect mix between not being 30 years older, but also not exactly being a peer and having that authority as well. This could be a really nice mix. And that's what the O's did. That's what they had with Borg, Schulte, and Fuller as well. And maybe it didn't work out the best, as the Orioles kind of fell apart a bit down the stretch this year, and Borg, Schulte, and Fuller are now elsewhere. But these are guys that the Orioles know, they trust, they like. I like this move with Sherman Johnson. I think his ascension was pretty fast, and I think it was warranted for him, and it's cool that he is going to be in the Orioles big league dugout. But that wasn't only the big change that was made, or at least announced, over the weekend. The left field wall is coming back in a little bit. Not all the way back in, but coming back in a little bit. We'll talk briefly about what the changes will be and why the O's may have done it. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. When you need a law firm, do you want the legal runaround, or would you rather have a no-nonsense approach? Well, you get the latter with the DK Law Group, a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with their modern approach. They know that speed is key, and the DK Law Group can leverage technology to streamline the process to serve you better and faster. They specialize in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. The DK Law Group is tech savvy, they treat clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. So contact DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On Orioles listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So the big announcement the Orioles made last week, Mike Elias calling a press conference with the media on Friday, and we learned that the wall's coming back in. Not all the way back in, but the wall in left field is coming back in a bit. It will move, according to Elias, anywhere from 9 to 20 feet in different spots throughout left field. And it will not come all the way back into what it was pre the Mount Baltimore out there, but it's going to be maybe more of a happy medium. It was initially moved back 30 feet, and the longest back there where Mr. Splash was at 398 in left center field. And it was also moved up about 6 feet as well to just over 13 feet high. It made it a gigantic wall out there. that made it very, very tough to hit home runs as a right-handed hitter. Now it will be as close as 363 at places in left field. Still not really back to the level across the board where it was when it was a hitter-friendly ballpark back in 2021. And before that, of course, the Orioles made the adjustment before the 2022 season, and it kind of corresponded with this team getting back to winning that year. And it certainly helped out the Orioles pitching staff. But Elias had a lot of quotes about it on Friday, basically saying, essentially, we went too far. It became something that players, especially the Orioles right-handed hitters, were a little too focused on. And he feels like they can find a little bit of a happier medium out there in left field. Now, there's a little mock-up here. This is courtesy of the Orioles, what the wall will be moved to. Now, the Orioles are not going to add any seats. If you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, you can see it here. They're not going to add any seats to kind of the area in between where the wall used to be and now where the wall is. It'll kind of be an open area there. I'm sure there'll be netting there, so when home runs fall and, they'll kind of sit in that net. Maybe eventually they will put something there. I'm sure the Orioles will brainstorm a way to make money there, but Mr. Splash has a little bit of a platform there where he can stand on, a little bit more space to spray the fans in the splash zone. And like Elias said, the new dimensions, the adjustments will be ready for opening day 2025. So I'm assuming basically ASAP, they're going to start on that construction. Now, why the changes? The Orioles wanted it to be a little more normal, I guess, out there. As you can, again, kind of see the changes here. It'll still be that 333 down the line, but the fence will move in, 373 in left field, 374. There will still be that corner there and the jut out to Mr. Splash's area and then to the bullpen, which will be at 376. But the wall's also going to get shorter. It's going to go from 13 feet back down to about 8 feet. So that brings into play some home run robberies in left field as well. It'll just mean for more home runs out there. Not as many fly balls are just going to be long outs as they have been the last 3 seasons. And again, I think the Orioles are just looking for a happy medium here. The old wall, the wall we saw for the last 3 years, turned the Orioles ballpark, this is per StatCast, into the 27th ranked ballpark in terms of home run factor for right-handed hitters. That basically means there were only 3 other ballparks over the past 3 seasons that were worse for righties to hit home runs. And it's kind of surprising the Orioles were that high, to be honest. But the thing is, before they moved the wall back in 2021, and before that, all the way back to 1992, when Oriole Park at Camden Yards opened, was that it was just too easy to hit a home run as a right-handed batter. It was the number 1 ballpark in park factors for home runs from righties. So the Orioles were trying to fix that because pitchers were just getting destroyed in this ballpark, and they felt that no pitchers wanted to sign with the Orioles because it was so easy to give up home runs. But they feel they went too far. And so now they feel like they can find a happy medium here. These dimensions make it end up more like an average left field at a ballpark across baseball. So maybe, they were first, they were 27th. Maybe this will get them back to around 14th or 15th for home runs by right-handed hitters and kind of find somewhere in the middle. And again, Elias talked about, hey, we wanted to bring it back a little bit. It was becoming too much of a distraction, but he also still wants it to help pitchers. And that's why he didn't want to, I would think, bring it all the way back to its previous distance, which was, again, a fly ball to left field, might end up a home run half the time at Oriole Park. Now, the biggest impacts here, obviously, right-handed hitters who hit for power. Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo are very excited about this change. I believe Kobe Mayo almost immediately retweeted the story when it came out on Friday that the Orioles were moving the wall back in. So he's certainly happy. Ryan Mountcastle's happy because no other Oriole has lost more home runs to the wall change in the last 3 years than Ryan Mountcastle has. So he'll be excited about that one. Impact for pitching, right? The Orioles just can't rely on pretty much every fly ball to left field is going to get caught in this ballpark and stay for a fly ball out. Like, pitchers are going to have to keep the ball on the ground a little bit more than they were, especially, maybe left-handers facing right-handed hitters. And then the other thing I think it helps the Orioles with is with that big cavernous left field they had out there before, you really had to have a second center fielder playing out there in left. That's why Colton Cowser was so valuable for the Orioles this year, because he played such good defense, covered so much range, was a Gold Glove finalist, probably should have won the award out there in left field. And that was huge value for the O's. Now, it's still going to be a bigger left field, and you still want a good defender out there. I think if you have 3 outfielders, I still think the worst one still plays in right field when you go to Camden Yards, but it makes it a little bit easier. So if you have to put the Heston Kjerstads or the Ryan O'Hearns of the world in left field at some point, you feel a little better doing that because there's not just as much vast ground to cover as well. And it might mean for a little bit lower batting averages for some guys because there's just, hey, there's less space out there. Outfielders will play a little further in, not as much room for singles, doubles, and triples, even though there is now more room for home runs. Now, I'm going to break this down much, much further actually on tomorrow's episode. So make sure you're tuned in there. Make sure you're commenting, and subscribing to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. Subscribe wherever you listen, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. There'll be a full episode tomorrow breaking down who this impacts the most, what the big impacts will be, park factors, all of that. We're going to do a full episode on the wall because it's a big thing of this Orioles team. They play half their games here, and this will change how baseball is played at Oriole Park once again 3 years later. So we'll break it down a little further tomorrow, but I'll kind of finish up with this today. I'm a little sad to see it go. I know there were a lot of people who kind of thought it was a gimmick and are probably happy that they're moving it back in and trying to find a happy medium because it kind of was a gimmick previously when the wall was so short in left field to begin with. But I don't know. I kind of thought that it gave Oriole Park something that no other ballparks had. I mean, there'd be so many fly balls where it was this was a home run in 29 of 30 ballparks, but not at Oriole Park. And it was just a long, loud out to the track in left field. It was kind of funny when Aaron Judge would complain about the Orioles moving the wall back. I kind of enjoyed it. I enjoy some of these gimmicks in the walls at ballparks. I love that in baseball, you can change the dimensions of your field. It can be very different from every other field you play on. I love that part of baseball. I'm a little sad they're moving it back in. I'm not going to lie. I feel like it's going to be more standardized. I feel like, again, at least it was kind of a gimmick way before, and then it was kind of a gimmick again when they moved it back and made it high. Now it's going to be a little more cookie cutter, which I don't like as much, but we'll wait to see the final verdict here and what it looks like on opening day. But be a weird 3-year stretch when you're looking at stats and park factors for Oriole Park that, oh yeah, right. In 10 years from now, 15 years from now, oh, that was one of the years where they had the crazy wall out there. It's maybe a little embarrassing that the Orioles made this move and then immediately are moving it back in. But again, we will get to all of that on tomorrow's episode. But a bunch more news and notes to round up and get to as we'll kind of whip around those to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And now, we are in the off-season. There's not going to be a lot of baseball tickets being bought for a while. Once we do get to opening day, though, make sure to go to Game Time. But hey, if you like other sports, you want to go see football, basketball, hockey, whatever it may be, they've got the tickets at Game Time. Or maybe baseball's your sport. Totally get that. In the offseason, not really a sports person. That's okay too, because at Game Time, you use Game Time Picks. The curation makes it easier to save more on not just sports, but also concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And they've got seat views. You can get a panoramic view of your seat on the app before you buy it, so you know where you're going to be and what you're going to see. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So we got a few Orioles news and notes further to get to, whipping around these quick topics before we finish off the pod. First thing, we got a couple of deadlines coming up on Tuesday. The first one is the Rule 5 protection deadline. It is Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. That is the deadline to place players onto your 40-man roster to protect them from the Rule 5 draft, which happens in early December in the winter meetings. Now, the Rule 5 draft is basically a way for players who are just kind of sitting in a minor league system, don't feel they have a path to get to the big leagues, but don't have a path to get to another organization, a way to give them a shot in the big leagues. If you draft another player in the Rule 5 draft, you do have to keep him on your big league roster for the entirety of the next season, or you lose him back to his previous team. It's mostly players who are, I believe it's 4 years removed from being drafted out of college and 5 years removed from being drafted out of high school is kind of a general sense of what the timeline looks like for Rule 5 eligible players. But the Orioles already added left-handed pitcher Luis Gonzalez to the 40-man roster, so he will be safe. The only other pick that I think is a lock is Brandon Young, former podcast guest of the Locked On Orioles podcast. He came on back in September. Make sure to go and check that one out. But he had such a great year at AAA. He's Rule 5 eligible. He's going to be ready to pitch in the big leagues in 2025, possibly as a starter for the Orioles. He is an easy selection to be added. Otherwise, there are a bunch of fringe cases. You've got really no hitters, but a bunch of pitchers. Justin Armbruster had an up and down year. Former Locked On Orioles podcast guest Keegan Gillies didn't make the jump to AAA, but had a great year in AA. Some other, reliever / starter types that people like: Cade Stroud, Ryan Long, Dylan Hyde, Alex Pham. These are all pitchers in AA and AAA in the system who are going to be eligible, and at least the Orioles will have a conversation about protecting. But my prediction is that Brandon Young is going to be the only guy they add to that 40-man roster. I just don't know if any of those other guys, another team is going to be willing to grab them and hold them on the roster. It's been very rare in the past couple of years that a team takes a player in the Rule 5 draft who hasn't at least appeared in AAA previously. And some of those guys that I just mentioned haven't even gotten to AAA, but otherwise, a lot of them still have a lot of seasoning to go before they're big league ready. In previous years, there were just way more names that will be protected on this list for the Orioles. But at this point, I think it's Brandon Young, and that might be it. And then, we'll kind of see down the road if the Orioles do pick anyone in the Rule 5 draft. But if they make any surprises, they add anyone else, have it covered on Wednesday's episode coming up this week after that protection deadline. And the other deadline on Tuesday is the qualifying offer deadline. Now, the Orioles offer the qualifying offer to both Anthony Santander and Corbin Burnes. Remember, it is a 1-year, $21 million contract. If it's accepted, the player comes back for that deal. If they decline it and the player eventually signs elsewhere in free agency, the Orioles get a compensation draft pick back. Corbin Burnes is not going to accept it, but the deadline is Tuesday to either accept or decline. This is the deadline for the players themselves. Corbin Burnes obviously is going to decline it. Maybe there's a small chance Santander would accept that to play one more year in Baltimore and then come back out as a free agent. But after the year you hit 44 home runs, I doubt he's going to accept a 1-year deal. He's going to try to get his long-term deal now. So again, possibility for Santander, but it's much more likely he also declines, which really wouldn't change much for their free agent status either. It's just more paperwork. But again, if one of them does accept, which would be kind of wild, we'll certainly have it covered on Wednesday as well. The Orioles made a minor league signing over the weekend, one of the smaller ones they're going to make. Robinson Martinez, a 26-year-old right-handed pitcher the Orioles signed to a minor league deal. Martinez has spent the last 2 seasons on the injured list in the minors with the Marlins. Not really sure what exactly the injury was. You would have to think some sort of arm injury, but basically hasn't pitched for the last 2 years. Last time he pitched in the minors was in AA with the Marlins in 2022. He had a 3.15 ERA with a 28% strikeout rate and a 9% walk rate in 20 innings of work before the injury. He also pitched about 35 innings in high A earlier that year before getting the move up to AA for 20 innings at the end of the year. But we do know he's healthy because he's finally at least pitching again somewhere. After 2 years of not pitching and then becoming a free agent, he is pitching in the Dominican Winter League right now. So we do know he's healthy. That is good. That's probably why the Orioles said, all right, we had our eye on this guy. We like his stuff. Let's jump on him now. He was originally signed by the Phillies out of the Dominican Republic in 2014. And shout out to Orioles on the Verge for more info, posting him with a fastball up to 97 with a slider as well. He has already initially been assigned to AA. That doesn't guarantee he's going to start the year with Bowie, but because he's never pitched above AA, I would think he will probably start the year in the Bay Sox bullpen. And then if he looks healthy and good for a month, he'd probably get the bump up to AAA, and then you just kind of see what you got there. Again, a lot of these minor league deals, they're flyers you take. You hope they pop. Most of them don't, but some of them do, and you look really, really smart when you make deals like that. 2 more pieces of notes to get to from former Orioles. The first one is Chris Holt. He has been hired by the Boston Red Sox to be their bullpen coach at the major league level this upcoming season. Of course, Holt has been with the Orioles for a while, really since Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal came over. Holt joining them from the Astros organization. He came in as the minor league pitching coordinator for a while. Then the Orioles bumped him up to major league pitching coach, where he stayed until the end of the 2023 season, when didn't seem like things were getting across perfectly with Chris Holt in that role. The Orioles kind of moved him to director of pitching, kind of pushed him back to the minor league side, hired Drew French as their big league pitching coach, who did a fantastic job in his first year with the Orioles in 2024. But you could just tell there was a little writing on the wall. Things were not perfect between the Orioles and Chris Holt. Spent the 1 year as the director of pitching, and then the Orioles kind of let him go from the organization. He was a coaching free agent, and he gets a deal with the Red Sox. Definitely a demotion from his last 2 jobs, director of pitching and big league pitching coach for the Orioles to be a bullpen coach, but he'll be trying to work his way back up to be a major league pitching coach again elsewhere. But hey, still congratulations to Chris Holt for finding another job. And the Orioles will see him a bunch as he stays in the division with the Red Sox. And then the final piece of news is Cole Irvin is heading over to Asia next year. Cole Irvin has signed a 1-year, $1 million deal with the Doosan Bears of the KBO in Korea. Now, 1 year, $1 million, that is the maximum amount of money you can give to a foreign player. The KBO has rules. You can't have more than 3 foreign players on one team. And in their first year, they can't make more than $1 million. But if he pitches well, sticks around, he can make much more in a potential second year and beyond. I would think Irvin is trying to play the card of what we've seen a good chunk of pitchers do over the last few years. Eric Fetty being the most recent one, where you go to Korea, you rebuild your value. Fetty, who was kind of a quad A pitcher, he became in the States, went to Korea, won KBO MVP, was awesome over there, and then got a nice 2-year deal from the White Sox in free agency to come back over to the States. So you would think Cole Irvin is going to try to pull that off with the Doosan Bears next year. I'm a little surprised. I thought he could have found himself a 1-year, fairly cheap major league deal, and honestly, a deal that probably would have been worth more than the $1 million he's getting to go play and live in Korea for a year. But again, despite his good start with the Orioles this year, it was a disaster down the stretch. The Orioles DFA'd him twice. Twins picked him up at the end of the year. He was even worse in Minnesota. They DFA'd him at the end of the season. It was just a really bad finish. So maybe because of that, Irvin knew he was only going to be offered minor league deals from teams. That doesn't mean he couldn't have made a team. Irvin absolutely could have taken a minor league deal, gotten a little bit better, and made somebody's opening day roster as like a 5th starter or a long man out of the bullpen. But I'm sure him and his agent weighed the options and figured, hey, let's go be, a top 3 starting pitcher on a KBO team, pitch every 5th day, work on some stuff, rebuild my value, and try and come back to the U.S. next year. Certainly a possibility. Didn't end the best with Cole Irvin in Baltimore after the trade that brought him over here, but he's an awesome guy. People love Cole Irvin, and I wish him absolutely the best, whether he wants to stay in Korea for a while or he wants to make it back to the States. Obviously wish him the absolute best on and off the mound for a good baseball guy in Cole Irvin. But that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. As I mentioned, we'll be back tomorrow doing a much deeper dive into the change of the left field wall, those exact dimensions, how they're changing, how it impacts the Orioles hitters, especially those from the right side, how it impacts what the Orioles could do in free agency, and also how it impacts how the O's play defense, what pitchers will be hurt and helped the most. There is a lot to get to with the wall change once again. We'll break it all down from every angle on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.